ولد الحسين عليه السلام قد أقبل وقال السلام عليك يا أمه فقلت عليك السلام يا ولدي ويا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي فقال لي يا أمه إني شمدك راية طيبة كان راية جد رسول الله فقلت نعم إن جدك وأخاك تحت الكساء فدنا الحسين عليه السلام نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا جداه السلام عليك يا من اختار الله أتأذن يكون معكما تحت الكساء فقال وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا شافي أمتي قد أذنت لك فدخل معهما تحت الكساء فأقبل عند ذلك أبو الحسن عليه السلام أبو الحسن عليه السلام علي بن أبي طالب عليه السلام وقال السلام عليك يا بنت رسول الله فقلت عليك السلام يا أبا الحسن ويا أمير المؤمنين فقال يا فاطمة إني شمدك راية طيبة كان راية أخي ابن عمي رسول الله فقلت نعم ها هو مع ولديك تحت الكساء فأقبل علي نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله أتأذن يكون معكم تحت الكساء فقال وعليك السلام يا أخي ويا وسيي وخليفتي وصاحب لواء قد أذنت لك فدخل علي تحت الكساء ثم أتيت نحو الكساء وقلت السلام عليك يا أبتا يا رسول الله أتأذن يكون معكم تحت الكساء فقال وعليك السلام يا بنتي ويا بزعتي قد أذنت لك فدخلت تحت الكساء فلما اكتملنا جميعا تحت الكساء أخذ برسول الله بطرف الكساء وهما بيد اليمنى إلى السماء وقال اللهم إن هؤلاء أهل بيتي وخاصتي وحامتي لحمهم لحمي ودمهم دمي يؤلمني ما يؤلمهم ويحزنني ما يحزنهم أنا حرب لمن حاربهم وسلم لمن سالمهم وعدو لمن عاداهم ومحب لمن أحبهم إنهم مني وأنا منهم فاجعل صلواتك وبركاتك ورحمتك وغفرانك ورضوانك علي وعليهم وأذهب عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. فقال الله عز وجل يا ملائكة يا سكان سماواتي إني ما خلقت سماء مبنيا ولا أرض مدحيا ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضيئا ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا ولا فلكا يسري إلا في محبة هؤلاء الخمسة الذين هم تحت الكساء. فقال أمين جبرائيل يا رب من تحت الكساء؟ فقال عز وجل هم أهل بيت النبوة ومعد الرسالة هم فاطمة وأبوها وبعلها وبنوها. فقال جبرائيل يا ربي أتأذن لأن أهبط إلى الأرض ليكون معهم سادسا؟ فقال الله نعم قد أذنت لك. فهبط الأمين جبرائيل وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله العلي الأعلى يقرأك السلام ويخصك بالتحية والإكرام ويقول لك وعزتي وجلالي إني ما خلقت سماء مبنيا ولا أرضا مدحيا ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضيئا ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري إلا لأجلكم محبتكم وقد أذن لي أدخل معكم فلتأذنوا لي يا رسول الله. فقال رسول الله وعليك السلام يا أمين وحي الله إنه نعم قد أذنت لك. فدخل جبرائيل معنا تحت الكساء فقال لي أبي إن الله قد أوحى إليكم يقول إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم رجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا. فقال علي لأبي يا رسول الله أخبرني ما لجلوسنا هذا تحت الكساء من الفضل عند الله. فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله والذي بعث بالحق نبيا واستفاني بالرسالة نجيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيعتنا محبينا إلا ونزلت عليهم الرحمة وحفت بهم الملائكة استغفرت لهم إلى أن يتفرقوا فقال علي عليه السلام إذا والله فزنا وفاز شيعتنا رب الكعبة. فقال أبي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله يا علي والذي بعث بالحق نبيا واستفاني بالرسالة نجيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محافل أهل الأرض وفي جبل من شيعتنا محبينا وفي مهموم إلا فرج الله هما ولا مغمون إلا كشف الله غما ولا طالب حاجة إلا وكذا الله حاجتا. فقال علي عليه السلام إذا والله فزنا وسعدنا وكذلك شيعتنا فازوا وسعدوا في الدنيا والآخرة ورب الكعبة.
دعاء كميل. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Haji, can you give me a voice? One voice. Okay.
One water?
No, just
One echo?
echo. Yeah, echo. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي قلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحت كل اسم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النغم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشتاء شدائد حاجته وعظم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لقبائي ساترا ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك. ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترته وكم من فوضهم من البلاء أغلته وكم من إثار وقيته وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته. اللهم عظم بلائي وافرت بي سؤالي وقصرت بي أعمالي وقعدت بي أغلالي وحبسني عن نفعي بعد أملي وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومطالي. يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك أن لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري ولا تعجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي وربي من لي غيرك أسأله كشف ضري والنظر في أمري إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي فغرني بما أهوى وأسعده على ذلك الغلاء فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعض حدودك وخالفت بعض أوامرك فلك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاءك وألزمني حكمك وبلاغك وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا مستغفرا منيبا مغرا مذعنا معترفا لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة رحمتك اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ضري وفكني من شد وثاقي يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي يوما بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي هبني لابتداء كرمك وصالف برك بي يا إلهي وسيدي وربي أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد ما انطوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك ولهج به لساني من ذكرك واعتقده ضميري من حبك وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيته أو تبعد من أدنيته أو تشرد من آويته أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمته وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدة وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقة وبشكرك مودعة وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققة وعلى ضمائر هبت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة وعلى جوارح سعد إلى أوطان تعبدك طاعة وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنا ما كذا الظن بك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك يا كريم يا رب وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها على أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكثه يسير بقاؤه قصير مدته فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض يا سيدي فكيف لي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما منها أزج وأبكي لعليم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته فلئن سيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلاءك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك فابني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك وابني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي عفوك فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقا لأضجن إليك بين أهلها زجيج العاملين ولا أصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين ولا أبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين وأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين يا غاية آمال العارفين يا غياث المستغيثين يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين ويا إله العالمين أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وذاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته وحبس بين أتباعها بجرمه وجريرته وهو يلج إليك وجيجا مؤمل لرحمتك ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك يا مولاي فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من علمك أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يعمل فضلك ورحمتك أم كيف يهرق لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا رب أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عتقه منها فتتركه فيها هيهات ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك ولا مشبع لما آملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحديك وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما وما كان لأحد فيها مغرا ولا مقاما لكنك تقدست أسماؤك أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين وأن تجلى ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون إلهي وسيدي فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلطت عليه من عليه أجريتها أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة ففي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته وكل ذنب أذنبته وكل قبيح أسررته وكل جهل عملته كتمته أو أعلنته أخفيته أو أظهرته وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جواري وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم وبرحمتك أخفيته وبفضلك سترته وأن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلته أو إحسان فضلته أو بر نشرته أو رزق بسطته أو ذنب تغفره أو خطأ تستره يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي و مالک رقی یا من بیدی ناصیتی یا علیما بضری و مسکنتی یا خبیرا بفقری و فاقتی یا رب یا رب یا رب اسألك بحقك و قدسك و اعظم صفاتك و اسمائك ان تجعل اوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة و بخدمتك موصولة و اعمالي عندك مقبولة حتى تكون اعمالي و اورادي كلها وردا واحدا و حالي في خدمتك سرمدا یا سیدی یا من علیه مولی یا من الیه شکوت احوالی یا رب یا رب یا رب قو على خدمتك جوارحي واشدد على العظيمة جوانحي وابلي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك حتى أسرع إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع إليك في البارزين واشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين وأخافك مخافة الموقنين وأجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرده ومن كادني فكد واجعل لي من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك وأقربهم منزلة منك وأخصهم زلفة لديك فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك وجد لي بجودك واعطف علي بمجدك واحفظني برحمتك واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا وقلبي بحبك متيما ومن علي بحسن إجابتك وأقلني أثرتي واغفر زلتي فإنك غليت على عبادك بعبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائك وضمنت لهم الإجابة فإليك يا رب نسبت وجهي وإليك يا رب مددت يدي فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي وبلغني مناي ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي يا سريع الرضا اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء فإنك فعال لما تشاء يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء یا من اسمه دوا و ذکره شفا و طاعته قنا ارحم من رأس مال الرجا و صلاح البکا یا سابق النعم یا دافع النقم یا نور المستوحشین فی الظلم یا عالما لا يعلم صل علی محمد و آل محمد وافعل بی ما انت اهله وصلی الله علی رسوله والائمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسلیما كثيرا سلام ببخشید
بیبی سکینہ کی شان میں بلندتر صلوات محمد و آل محمد. اس بات سے محسوس کرو کیا ہے سکینہ عباس کے ہونٹوں کا قصیدہ ہے سکینہ. اس بات سے محسوس کرو کیا ہے سکینہ. آئینہ زہرا میں جو دیکھا تیرا بچپن آئینہ زہرا میں جو دیکھا تیرا بچپن ہر رقص پکارا کہ تو زہرا ہے سکینہ. اس بات سے محسوس کرو کیا ہے سکینہ. ہر عمر کے حیدر نے تیرا جھولا جھلایا ہر عمر کے حیدر نے تیرا جھولا جھلایا. یہ اوج فقط تو نے ہی پایا ہے سکینہ. اس بات سے محسوس کرو کیا ہے سکینہ. عباس کی نظروں سے کوئی پڑھ کے تو دیکھے عباس کی نظروں سے کوئی پڑھ کے تو دیکھے. احساس کی ایک نہج البلاغہ ہے سکینہ. احساس کی ایک نہج البلاغہ ہے سکینہ. عباس کے ہونٹوں کا قصیدہ ہے سکینہ. اس بات سے محسوس کرو کیا ہے سکینہ. پر محمد و آل محمد صلوات.
Sheikh Bilal, Dr. Dungersi, respected elders, brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. On behalf of the Sijni Managing Committee, we would like to wish you all a Kushali Mubarak. Tomorrow Friday, Salatul Jumma will start at 11:30 a.m. with Du'a Nudba with Sheikh Bilal, followed by Saturday, our Sufra of Imam Jafar as-Sadiq alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Will begin at 5:30 p.m. starting with Salat. On Sunday we will have Madrasa from 10:45 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. And on Monday we will be commemorating the wafat of Imam Musa al-Qadim alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Starting at 8:15 p.m. Tonight's Surah Yasin has been sponsored for the Ithal Sawab of the marhumeens that are displayed on the screen. Let us all recite Surah Fatiha for all marhumeen. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Lastly, please join me in reciting the ayah of Amma Yujib 5 times for all those who are sick here and around the world. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma Yujibul Mustarriza da'u wa yakshifu su. 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 Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Please recite aloud salawat for Sheikh Bilal. Muhammad wa ala Muhammad salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين أما بعد فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولا تقتلوا أولادكم خشية إملاق نحن نرزقكم وإياكم إن قتلهم كان خطأ كبيرا آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد. Your second salawat for love of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. اللهم صل على محمد. And your loudest salawat for ta'ajil faraj sahib al-asr wa zaman. اللهم صل على محمد wa ali Muhammad. In our brief discussion around fiqh, there's a question that's come up a couple of times that bears discussing, especially for our youth who may or may not be familiar with the topic, which comes to the question of fish. And what fish are permissible for us to eat and what is considered fish? When it comes to creatures of the sea, the way that they are made halal to consume is different than the way traditional meat is made halal to consume. So for example, when it comes to traditional meat, there's the conversation around, one, is the animal permissible to eat? And two, is that animal slaughtered correctly? When both of these conditions are met, that for example it is a cow and not for example a lion, or it is for example a sheep and not for example, na'uzubillah, a pig, that for one, the animal is halal. Two, how that animal is slaughtered now makes that animal permissible to eat. That we understand, we know that there are certain types of meat, though it comes from a cow, we can't eat it because it is what's considered meat or a dead body because it was not made dhabiha, it was not slaughtered in the correct process. When it comes to fish, the dhabiha of fish is consistent of one, that the fish is a permissible type. The fish that are permissible type simply fit into the category of what's called dhu fils, or possess scales. That if it is a fish that has scales, it is permissible to eat. If it is a fish that does not possess scales, it is impermissible to eat. Even for example, and this is just an elaboration, there are different types of caviar. Caviar are fish eggs. Some caviar and fish eggs are from those fish that possess scales. If the fish that it comes from possesses scales, it's permissible to eat. If it's the traditional type of caviar which comes from sturgeon is not a fish that has scales to my knowledge. Therefore, traditional caviar that comes from sturgeon is not something that's permissible to eat because it comes from a fish that's impermissible. Is eating fish eggs permissible? Yes, if it comes from a fish that's permissible. So the first category of what makes a fish permissible to eat is that one, it possesses scales. This is the category that we can now consume. There are many fish that have scales, and that if you go to the store and you become curious about is this fish permissible, you can very easily look it up and even ask the question is, for example, trout or salmon, or do they have scales? And you'll find an answer fairly easily. Once we've accepted the category, the second criteria for a fish to be permissible to eat is that it has to be killed either when it's taken out of the water, or two, it dies in the net in the water as it's being pulled out. If it is something that is already dead in the water and it's pulled out and said, hey look, I got a fish, that's not a halal fish, we can't eat that fish. The traditional forms of fishing, that for example the fish is pulled out of the water alive or dies in the net, is something that is globally accepted and appropriate of how fish should be caught to be sold to be edible. So therefore, it does not require that the fisherman is a Muslim. It requires that the fisherman has pulled the fish alive and then it's been killed, or that when the fisherman caught it in a net, that it died somewhere in that net as it was pulled up. Then it becomes permissible. It is not a condition that, for example, it has to be a Muslim who caught the fish. We can take it from someone who's not a Muslim and that's permissible. Now, when it comes to the idea of what is considered a fish with scales, there is one item that is something that is often debated, which is, for example, shrimp. And it says, well, shrimp is a crustacean. Well, that's the English or Western biological classification of this animal. We have seen other narrations that make and count shrimp as one of the permissible animals to consume, therefore we are allowed to consume it. It does not broaden the category to all crustaceans, that for example crustaceans and shellfish in general are impermissible because they don't possess scales. The only point where we have a conflict with the category of what's a shellfish and crustacean is shrimp. Shrimp is considered permissible, the others are not, which includes and is not limited to lobster is not permissible. Crab is not permissible. Mussels, oysters are not permissible. So there are some people that say and look at these categories and they're unfamiliar with them. In Madhhab Ja'fari the matter is very clear. It is not universally accepted. Some schools of thought within Islam have the opinion that anything in the water is permissible. We don't believe that. But the significance of mentioning this is that if another school of thought accepts these ideologies of eating lobster or other shellfish or other creatures, it may be permissible for them, but for us it's not permissible. Our fiqh is very specific to this matter. One interesting point though is that, I'll ask you guys, a squid, is it halal? No. Is it najis? Who says yes? Who says no? Who doesn't want to raise their hand? What's interesting is, for an object to be najis, it has to be what's called nafs as-sa'ila, that it's something whose blood gushes out when it's killed. Fish in general do not have blood that gushes out when they are killed. Therefore, they are not najis. When we talk about, for example, a cow that isn't slaughtered correctly, we say this is mita and it's najis. This is a dead animal and it's najis. A fish, even if it's not halal to consume, it doesn't become najis because it is not nafs as-sa'ila, it doesn't have blood that gushes out. So in the absence of that, it is tahir, though it is impermissible to consume. So it's kind of one of those fun trivia questions for our next Kahoot, maybe, I don't know. Is that, can something be haram to consume yet tahir? And those animals that fit into this category are those that, for example, do not have blood that gushes out. They're tahir, but you can't consume them. So it's one of those interesting facts that remains. But when it comes to the subject of fish, a fish is clean and tahir. It is permissible to eat if it possesses scales and was caught appropriately. It was not something floating dead in the water and you picked it up and said, dinner. We don't do that. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad. Briefly for our discussion tonight, one of the dates that is associated with the Wiladat of the daughter of Imam Hussein is this night and this day, which is reported to be associated with the daughter of Imam Hussein, Sakina. The validity of the dates is not something that is universally agreed upon, as most daughters of the Ahlul Bayt, you notice we don't know their actual birth date, and that was an affair of the household where this information wasn't always disclosed. Also, who we call Sakina is referred to differently in different cultures. So for example, in our culture, the personality who we refer to as Sakina, in the Arab and Persian culture is referred to as Ruqayya. Sukaina is another daughter of Imam Hussein who is an older daughter of Imam Hussein. And there is this contrast in the naming structure that's known or understood. However, in any which format that we look at, these are mutabarik personalities, and to have the affiliation to be able to talk about them and to talk about the importance that they held in the life of Ahlul Bayt is important to have this discussion. Which is why the significance of the conversation tonight centers around the idea of having children, and how having children is considered in Islam to be not just a good thing, but a very recommended thing that the Ahlul Bayt always promoted. In current times, and this is why this has to be a conversation, in current times, children are seen as a bad thing. They're seen as, for example, a liability, a responsibility, an expense. And often the figure is discussed, what does it cost to raise a child this day and age? And that number keeps ballooning astronomically. And people keep talking about how expensive and difficult it is to raise children. This idea of looking at children as like a cost or a cost center or an expense and a liability is not something new. Rather, as a matter of fact, when we take a look at history, this was the opinion of the Arab before the advancement and before the presence of Islam. This is how the Arab used to think as well too. And to correct this ideology and thought process, Allah Himself discussed the issue of having children in the Quran. And in the verse that we began our discussion with, which is from Surah Isra, verse number 31, Allah gives the instruction, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ خَشْيَةً إِمْلَاقًا. Do not kill off your children and your offspring for fear of poverty. نَحْنُ نُرْزُقُهُمْ وَإِيَّاكُمْ. We are the ones who sustain them as well as you. إِنَّا قَتَلَهُمْ كَانَ خِطْأً كَبِيرًا. And that certainly killing them is a great sin. Look at history and how it repeats itself. That there was a time where children were considered a liability, a loss, a difficulty, and they were killed for coming into existence, and they were killed for being had, because it was considered to be an expense and a difficulty and a liability, especially the daughters. And in contemporary times, the self-worship of society has again increased, where, for example, my desires, my needs, my wants are the priority, and a child takes away from my freedom, from my desires, from what I want to be, and it ties me down. And it's an expense that will reduce my freedom. Many of our youth look at children in this perspective, in a very materialistic perspective, and Allah is the one who is saying that this is the incorrect thought process. The Ahlul Bayt continued to teach that this was a negative thought process and not to think like this. They used to love children, promoted having children. And in the eyes of Allah and in a spiritual lifestyle, to have children is a very significant and beneficial item. Whereas in the material world, we look at the idea of having a child as a negative. That having a child will limit me. It will stop me from my freedom of travel. It will stop me from buying things. It will stop me and cause me to lose my money and my wealth in raising them. First and foremost, Allah says, what money is yours? And who gave you what you possess? I brought you into existence, and I'm the one who's giving your sustenance, and I am the one who will sustain the one that comes. It's not our job to provide for that child. It's Allah's job and responsibility to provide for that child. So the materialistic aspect, Allah is guaranteeing and saying that, why are you worried about this? This is my responsibility, not yours. And many of us can vouch for, and it is important that children should understand that it's true, that when you have a child, it's like hitting the jackpot. Money comes, and your sustenance increases. The idea that, I can only afford or I can only have 1 or 2 children, this isn't the Islamic thought process. This isn't a God-centric thought process. Rather, the ideology that Islam wants us to have and promotes us to have is have as many children as you can raise well. This was the attribute of the Ahlul Bayt. This was the attribute of the followers of the Ahlul Bayt. Why? Because there are a variety of benefits that are derived from a child when we look at a God-centric view. I'll explain briefly if you guys are okay. Ready? Everybody's all right? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. First and foremost, the process of having children is to increase the mercy that one receives in their life, and that one of the ways that, for example, we improve our connection with Allah is through kindness to our children. There are a variety of ahadith, whether from our 6th Imam, our 5th Imam, our 3rd Imam, our 2nd Imam, that talk about the idea that having a child is one of the ways that Allah's mercy increases upon you. For example, we have one discussion from our 6th Imam where a person comes and he says, who shall I perform kindness to? And the Imam says, to your parents. He says, but my parents passed away a long time ago, I have no parents. He says, then perform kindness to your children and Allah will perform kindness to you. The showing of love to your children is one of the aspects by which Allah increases His mercy upon a person. The Ahlul Bayt used to instruct that show your children mercy and kindness, and Imam Ali would specify, keep your promises to your children because you are the only one that they learn to rely on. In this aspect, we can take a look and see that the relationship between parent and child lays out the fundamentals of faith in Allah, which is what Imam Ali is teaching, and this was something that was exploited by communist Russia back in the day. That the USSR, to break the relationship between theology and children, would teach parents that keep your child hungry and then tell them to call Allah, our God, and then don't feed them, and then teach them to ask for Stalin or teach them to ask for Russia and then feed them, and say to them that, look, God does not feed you, Russia feeds you. Why do you believe in anything else? Imam Ali is making the counterpoint to say that if you want your children to have trust in Allah, make sure that they have trust in you, and that you are a trustworthy person in their relationship, and that will build a trusting relationship with Allah. You fulfill your promises, and they will believe that Allah too fulfills promises. Because the love of Allah is greater than the love of a parent. Now, this way, it increases our awareness and cognizance of our relationship with Allah, as well as putting matters into practice. Second to that, we mentioned already that they increase the rizq and sustenance that comes into a house and brings more sustenance into a house, and Allah has promised this Himself, that do not fear these family relationships that are created, because Allah is the one who will provide sustenance. Similarly, we see a similar narration, a similar ayah of Quran that we recite whenever we recite our nikah. وَأَنْكِحُوا الْأَيَّامَ مِنْكُمْ وَالصَّالِحِينَ مِنْ عِبَادِكُمْ وَإِمَائِكُمْ أَنْ يَكُونُوا فُقَرَاءَ يُغْنِهِمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ وَاللَّهُ وَاسِعٌ عَلِيمٌ. When Allah makes the commandment and gives the instruction, go and get married off the poor and the servants from amongst your community, the pious ones. And if they happen to be poor, Allah will give them sustenance and provide for them. And Allah is all encompassing and all aware. The significance of this is doing those things that Allah commands you to. Never fear what Allah has commanded to you out of fear of poverty or out of fear of loss. Allah provided you for this time, He'll continue to provide for you. So the increase of rizq is already promised for anyone who follows the commands of Allah. But even more than that, these children for us are a wasila and a tool by which we take care of our akhirah. The same way that society is telling you that it's bad for your finances to have children, Allah is telling you it's good for your akhirah to have children. That it benefits you in your akhirah to have children. The idea of having children and raising those children well, that as soon as we start to teach this child the religion of Islam, the barakat that we receive increases so manyfold that there's no other way of attaining that goodness without this process of having children. There's a great level of goodness that can't be attained except by having children. So if we were to look at it in a material sense, it makes no sense. Why have kids? But if we look at it in a spiritual sense, there is nothing better than to have children. And this is why we saw the tradition of the Ahlul Bayt having many children. When, for example, we see the sons and daughters of Imam Ali, we see the sons and daughters of Imam Hassan, of Imam Hussein, and most famously of our seventh Imam, who we'll discuss on Monday, Imam Musa ibn Ja'far al-Kadhim alayhi salam. Do you mean to tell me you were a better financial planner, you were more conscious of your akhirah and your needs and your liabilities and availability than Imam Musa ibn Ja'far? He had 37 children, 18 boys and 19 girls. It was the idea and the teaching that this is a good attribute to possess and that this is your structure and your lineage that you need to invest in and to bring about those people who worship Allah on this earth. It's explained and said that, for example, children, that when we raise them, as we're going through the process of raising that child, when we teach that child to pray, if they have no wajib prayers at the time that they're learning, every prayer that they say, the entirety of the thawab goes to the parent. When that child, when they learn to recite the Qur'an and they begin the process of recitation of Qur'an, Allah forgives the sins of the parents. He eases their difficulties. Anyone who is conscious of this would want to have then children and to make sure that these children are present. Considering and continue the fact that every member of that lineage, there are many actions that a person performs that the benefit is given to their parents. Including, we have some narrations that talk about the aspect of going to Hajj. That's one person who goes to Hajj, 7 generations before him and 7 generations after him all benefit from that one Hajj that you perform. What that means to say is that when I make the intention to go to Hajj, that those 7 generations before me that prepared me and introduced me and taught me the love of Islam all benefit from the aspect that I went so far as to visit the house of Allah. And that the impact of my going to Hajj will benefit the next 7 generations that will come after me because of my affiliation with Hajj. So to raise these children in this process, it is a very effective process of finding good generations and building good generations that will be beneficial to me in the day of judgment. And that when I raise these children and I raise them well, they will only benefit me. There can be no harm that comes to me from it. The love of these children, the beneficence of these children, isn't something to say that, for example, and it happens at times, that the children are a source of difficulty as well too. أَمْوَالُكُمْ وَأَوْلَادُكُمْ فِتْنَةٌ, that your wealth and your children are a test for you. This test that comes about, sometimes when it comes about in our children, we may have a child who's disobedient. There are many instructions from the Ahlul Bayt about disobedient children as well too. For example, we have a hadith from our Holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, where he says a naughty child is a sign of high intellect. That it will be someone who is very intellectual and smart and intelligent, to bear patiently with them, not to suppress them. That it is a sign of high intellect, treat them well. These are instructions where the Ahlul Bayt are teaching us that how to deal with a difficult situation should we possess it. They've given us much instruction in realms like this, of how to educate our children, how to keep them with us, how to raise them properly. But even, for example, if someone says that I raised the child and it did not reach completion. The famous example is the story of Nabi Musa, when he meets Hazrat Khizr. And Hazrat Khizr, amongst his actions, there's a young boy who dies, who is killed by Khizr. And Khizr says that this was going to be one who was disobedient. Allah wanted to replace him with a better. There's a few points within this. One is not to imagine and say that, any child who dies, it's because they were going to be disobedient. No, Allah tests through this process of having children and losing children. And there are difficulties that befall them. But that there is always khair within whatever Allah does. And the khair that, for example, a child who is born to a parent but passes away in his youth, is that child is innocent. There is no test for them. So what does that mean? On the Day of Judgment, when we stand for our test, these children have no test. And they go immediately to the doors of heaven because they were not ever mukallif, they never had taklif. There was no wajibat upon them. Now the Prophet describes that these young children who pass, when they go to the doors of heaven, they stop at the doors of heaven until the angels ask, "O child, Allah has granted you heaven, why don't you enter?" And the child asks, "And what of my parents?" And when they ask, "What of my parents?" Allah will be the one who answers, "You take your parents and go to heaven together." That they become such a strong wasila that even if, God forbid, that we don't have a child that grows to maturity, even that child is something that is a great benefit. Our eighth Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Rada alayhi salam, he says that child, don't be afraid of these children that pass away in their youth. He says that child that passed away in his youth is better for your akhirah than if you left 12 sons behind who were the companions and fought under the hand of Al-Qa'im. Imagine to say that my sons, my 12 sons, fought for the Imam. Muhammad Allah is saying, don't be afraid that if this child doesn't grow up to even attain that. Don't be afraid of this. That it is something that is good for your akhirah, that this child will be an assistance for you. In this aspect, we understand that the God-centric view of all the benefits in dunya and akhirah, whether it be seen as a rizq, whether it be seen as mercy, whether it's seen as being something that makes us pious by being in the company of these children, is an attribute to be desired, especially when we consider the benefits of the akhirah that we attain. That if one of my children were to become pious, more pious than I, to be someone who is religious, someone who is committed to Islam, someone who works for the Imam, works for the Ahlul Bayt, that them as a wasila would be something that improves my condition in the hereafter. And most significantly, similarly to how we invest in a 401k. Why do we invest in a 401k? That someday I won't be able to earn, therefore I set aside some of my earnings that can assist me when I have lost the ability to earn. A child is your 401k. Now I'm not saying look at them as investment structures, but truthfully, when I die and I can't do any more good deeds for myself, I can't seek forgiveness for my sins, it is that child after me that every good deed that they do that I've taught, that lives on after me, I will receive the benefit for it. And whenever that child prays for me, I will receive forgiveness for my sins. But if there is no child, then who am I counting on? Whose life have I influenced well enough that they'll remember me to pray for me, to assist me in that time of need? Now in this aspect we take a look and we see that the love of the Ahlul Bayt, and especially in this situation and the Wiladat that we're commemorating, is that Imam Hussein himself possessed a daughter that he loved greatly. And daughters are one of the greatest mercy that can be possessed. Which is why we see our Holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that when he is blessed with a daughter. Meaning that rahmatul lil alameen, the greatest blessing that can be given to him is a daughter. And that daughter is a source of comfort and peace for him. And the Prophet would explain when people would be upset by this, is he would explain and he would say that to raise 3 daughters in the love of Allah and to raise them as good Muslims guarantees a man that he will go to heaven. So eventually the one with 2 daughters comes up, says, Ya Rasulullah, I only have 2. He says, وَلَوْ كَانَ إِثْنَيْنِ, that even if you only had 2 daughters that you raised well in the way of Islam, Allah would guarantee you into heaven. And then the one with 1 daughter and comes, Ya Rasulullah, I only have 1. He says, even if you raise 1 daughter with the love of Allah on the path of Islam, Allah will guarantee you Jannah. So therefore our daughters for us are a great blessing, and they're a source of pleasure, and they're a source of comfort, and a source of success in the hereafter. In the same way that our lineage continues from the boys, it continues from the girls. And it is something that gives us a great success. And that's why the love of children is very important, and the promotion of having children is something we want to teach our families. Don't let the culture that we live in influence your children to believe that having children is a bad thing. Having children is loved. Ahlul Bayt love this, and they promoted this. And the Ahlul Bayt will never promote something that's bad for us. They will only promote things that are good for us. Therefore, in the example of Imam Hussein, we know of at least 3 of his sons and 3 of his daughters. However, in some narrations he had up to 5 sons and even more daughters. And that the daughters of Imam Hassan were famous, that there were many Banat al-Hassan, that Imam Hassan had many daughters. They loved to have children, and they promoted this amongst their community and their followers to have children. Especially when someone came to our sixth Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhi salam, finish on this hadith, and he comes in a state where he's sad. And the Imam asks him, why do I find you in a state of sadness? He says, Ya Rasulullah, I had another child today. And he says, that's good news. He says, but it was a daughter. Imam Sadiq explains to me, he says, why are you upset? The rizq of hers is in the hands of Allah, and to carry her weight is a responsibility of this earth. What's your problem with it? Why are you being upset? It is someone who Allah will provide for. The same is the perspective the Imam wants to teach us for all of our children. Allah is the one who gives them rizq. The earth is what carries them and brings them forth into this place. Our association with them is the pure association that they are a source of goodness and benefit for us. So our goal should be that our families grow, our children grow, and we promote the having of children, not because, more than 2 children I'll have to buy a bigger car, or that more than 3 children I won't be able to afford their college. No, Allah will provide their rizq. Our goal is that our job is have as many children as you can raise well for the sake of Islam, and to work in that path that they are raised as good Muslimin. That the same way that today we are pleased to mention one of the children of Imam Hussein, may Allah make it so that the world is pleased to mention one of our children in this earth. ندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم. We raise our hands in dua. Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah, Ya Allah. Ya Mahmoud bihaqqi Muhammad, Ya A'la bihaqqi Ali, Ya Fatir al-Samawat bihaqqi Fatima, Ya Muhsin bihaqqi al-Hasan, Ya Qadim al-Ahsan bihaqqi al-Husayn. Oh Allah, we ask you by the rights of this day, by the rights of those that are present and those that are missing from amongst us, oh Allah, forgive our sins and cover our flaws. Oh Allah, protect our children on the upright path of Islam. Ya Allah, those amongst us who have children, may Allah give us the tawfiq to raise them well. Those who do not have children, may Allah bless them with children. And those who are not yet married, may Allah bless them with spouses. Ya Allah, we have gathered here by the rights of this night, by the right of the mention of the daughter of Imam Hussein. Oh Allah, fulfill our hajat. Oh Allah, those amongst our family and our community that are suffering through sickness and disease, Ya Allah, give shifa'at to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Oh Allah, we ask you by the rights of this night that those who are suffering through insecurity and difficulty around this world, oh Allah, give aman and security and peace to the believers wherever they are. Oh Allah, hasten the reappearance of Sahib al-Zaman. Make us and our families from the upright supporters of Sahib al-Zaman. Entitle us to the ziyarat of Imam Hussein in this world and the shafa of Imam Hussein in the hereafter. 1 Surah Fatiha, 3 times Surah Ikhlas, لأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات مع الصلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Assalamu alaikum. Just a quick announcement. Tonight's majlis was recited for the Ithal Thawab of Marhuma Fatima Muhammad Taqi Rahim. Please recite a Surah Al-Fatiha. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا رسول الله يا نبي الله. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين يا علي بن أبي طالب. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا حسن بن علي المجتبى ورحمة الله وبركاته. زيارة وارثة. السلام عليك يا وارث آدم صفوة الله. السلام عليك يا وارث نوح نبي الله. السلام عليك يا وارث إبراهيم خليل الله. السلام عليك يا وارث موسى كليم الله. السلام عليك يا وارث عيسى روح الله. السلام عليك يا وارث محمد حبيب الله. السلام عليك يا وارث علي أمير المؤمنين ولي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن محمد المصطفى. السلام عليك يا ابن علي المرتضى. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا ابن خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور. أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وأطعت الله ورسوله حتى أتاك اليقين. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأصلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة، لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها ولم تلبسك من مظلهمات ثيابها. وأشهد أنك من دعائم الدين وأركان المؤمنين. وأشهد أنك الإمام البر التقي الرضي الزكي الهادي المهدي. وأشهد أن الأئمة من ولدك كلمة التقوى وأعلام الهدى والعروة الوثقى والحجة على أهل الدنيا. وأشهد الله وملائكته وأنبياءه ورسله أني بكم مؤمن وبيا بكم موقن، بشرائع ديني وخواتيم عملي، وقلبي لقلبكم سلم، وأمري لأمركم متبع. صلوات الله عليكم وعلى أرواحكم وعلى أجسادكم وعلى أجسامكم وعلى شاهدكم وعلى غائبكم وعلى ظاهركم وعلى باطنكم. زيارة علي بن الحسين. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله. السلام عليك يا ابن نبي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن الحسين الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها الشهيد وابن الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها المظلوم وابن المظلوم. لعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. زيارة الشهداء. السلام عليكم يا أولياء الله وأحباءه. السلام عليكم يا أصفياء الله وأوداءه. السلام عليكم يا أنصار دين الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار رسول الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي محمد الحسن بن علي الولي الناصح. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي عبد الله، بأبي أنتم وأمي طبتم وطابت الأرض التي فيها دفنتم وفزتم فوزا عظيما. فيا ليتني كنت معكم فأفوز معكم. زيارة هجرة أباس. السلام عليك يا أبا الفضل العباس بن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن السيد الوصيين. السلام عليك يا ابن أول القوم إسلامه وأقدمهم إيمانه وأقومهم بدين الله وأحوطهم على الإسلام. أشهد لقد نصحت لله ولرسوله ولأخيك فنعم الأخ المواسي. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة استحلت منك المحارم وانتهكت حرمة الإسلام. فنعم الصابر المجاهد المحامي الناصر، والأخ الدافع عن أخيه المجيب إلى طاعة ربه الراغب فيما زهد فيه غيره من الثواب الجزيل والثناء الجميل. وألهقك الله بدرجة آبائك في جنات النعيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا علي بن الحسين زين العابدين. السلام عليك يا محمد بن علي الباقر. السلام عليك يا جعفر بن محمد الصادق. السلام عليك يا موسى بن جعفر الكاظم. السلام عليك يا علي بن موسى الرضا. السلام عليك يا محمد بن علي الجواد. السلام عليك يا علي بن محمد الهادي. السلام عليك يا حسن بن علي الأسكري. السلام عليك يا حجة الله يا ابن الحسن يا صاحب الزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين.